Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Equipped with Strength podcast. We have Jonathan Fass back with us today. I got a question and I thought you would be a good person to bounce it off and discuss. So, this question comes from Cara: to tuck or not to tuck the pelvis during exercise? She says, when I first started into kettlebells years ago, the instruction was to tuck and to tuck hard. Now, I'm trying to, unlearn that and untuck my pelvis to have more of a neutral spine. It does help me feel my pelvic floor and TV abs, but the whole thing can feel confusing in determining the best way to engage glutes. As I come across this recently, is that I did not realize it, but I think at the time of these tucking and I guess like squeeze, I don't know whether this is the same thing as just squeezing your glutes really hard at like into the extension.
Mm-hmm.
That there was apparently a lot of controversy about this back in, whenever it started. Other than the fact that you're trying to engage the glutes, do the glutes need that much effort to engage, and
Mm-hmm.
do they consciously need to do that? And I know that I cue it squeezing from the bottom
Mm-hmm.
all the way up to the extension. And but that's why I've got you here, because I thought, what an interesting topic to discuss,
Right.
because in relation to a normal healthy person, there's no reason why they should or should not do it, I don't
Right.
think.
Yeah,
But
I generally agree with that. I don't know. I mean, as with most things, I don't think that there's a great answer. It's not typically something that I'm familiar with in the literature. Maybe someone assessed that, but I have not seen anything about anything like that, like this type of like focus on the area. It's an old bodybuilding thing, right? So
mm,
you want to like, the mind muscle connection, and it's not entirely wrong. It's not quite right either, but it's not
mhm,
awful. I think that it's all relative to what you're doing, because if you're, and I think we might have touched on this in the other video as well, right? If I'm lifting, let's say 60% of one rep max, which is a relatively lightweight, I
mhm,
shouldn't be squeezing as if I'm doing a one rep max, right? I shouldn't be forcing the issue. I should be moving naturally and functionally, because I think something that's very lost in exercise, by and large, from general advice, from what I can tell, is the idea that your amount of force provided or produced should be relative to the effort that you're producing, right? So if I'm lifting low weights, I shouldn't be working like I'm lifting heavy
mm,
hard weights. um and if I need to, you know if I don't feel a muscle, it doesn't mean the muscle isn't working. The
mhm,
somatosensory sense, the sense of how I move, the sensory experience itself is not the same as saying a muscle is or is not operating or activating, so to speak. It is a rare condition that implies a neurological problem if a muscle is not activating.
mhm,
There can be changes to activation levels, certainly, but that is typical more of someone that is currently in pain, post-operative, things of that nature, or again, a neurological condition that may actually affect the neuromuscular system, not the apparently healthy individual that just can't feel their glutes squeeze, so to speak.
mm,
Um, but again, I don't think that there's anything wrong about it per se, but there's a difference again between, I do a set of squats and I just kind of focus on my glutes to make sure that I'm, moving in a way that feels comfortable and effective, versus walking down the street constantly squeezing because somehow I think that's going to protect my back, right? Like something along
mhm,
those lines. In terms of the position, should I tuck? Should I extend? It's relative to the individual, right?
mhm,
Some people, their spine, they may be tucked more naturally as a postural positional thing, and there may be benefit to them potentially for going in an opposite direction, and vice versa. But generally speaking, we are very poor at being able to determine the actual lordotic curve of the spine. So there's wonderful research on that, about they would ask medical students or medical doctors or physical therapists, is this person in lordosis or, kyphosis? And then they would actually compare it to, radiographic imaging, and everyone was wrong. And they, misplaced this for that, like, because you can't really see that.
Yeah.
You can guess, but you can't really see. So I think what is more specific is to say, you experiment, tuck your hips on one rep, then extend your hips on another, and arch your back on one. And then, all these kind of things, change your foot position, move front to back or back to front. What feels better? That's generally what's going to happen. Do I feel like I really could move weight easily? Or if something has been bugging me, suddenly it stopped bugging me, or I felt an area that I haven't felt before with this foot position, right? So stuff like that, I think, is a far more, it's far better advice, because it's treating the individual. It's saying you as an individual should decide within reason what is best position for you, right? And when I say in reason, the things that they talk about this is good form, it's a good place to start. But it doesn't mean that it must be held this way, nor does it mean that it will be held that way. Because as you exercise, as you fatigue, which is part of the goal of exercise, you will change the way that you move. And that's not necessarily bad, and certainly not an acute type of thing. Just getting tired when you exercise, maintain what is reasonable form and reasonable speed, of motion. And when it really crumbles, then stop.
Good point. So that deals with that question. But I guess, like, I kind of think about those things, like, why are we doing these things? And we get kind of stuck in these, this is a better way to do it. And I'll find myself saying things too, like, maybe this would be better, but if you try this, you'll have a more efficient movement, or you'll lift more, or whatever. And generally speaking, just through experience, I know that this probably will have that desired effect. But I kind of try, especially now, to say, here's your options, basically choose. And anyway, what you were saying there was, like, day to day can even change. So one position one day will be maybe a more tucked position, and the next time I go to do that exercise like that, it doesn't feel so good. Back in the day, actually, I did do much more of that tucking, and even, like, the sort of deliberately posterior, making my pelvis go posterior tilt, in order to get more glute engagement. I don't know whether you know this or not, but, like, I always wonder, like, is that, even doing what I think? Is it actually, could it be creating more a problem sometimes? Like, because you're maybe, like, especially certain people, I think sometimes it could, but it is an interesting, when I saw this question, I was like, it's a fair question, since I've recently come across the same criticism of whether or not it's doing anything, and whether you should or shouldn't. And it's usually this idea of this middle, and it's like, it's not fixed, it's just like, move up and down the spectrum of it and see where you kind of fit in there one day.
I mean, there are full approaches that are like that. The idea is, from day to day, you assess your position, your lift, there's at least one approach that I'm familiar with. Actually, well, there's more than one, because there's a type of approach that I will generally use in my practice when I'm dealing, I'm working with someone that's more of a, your run-of-the-mill orthopedic condition. My knees hurt, I'm a runner, or whatever it is. Runners have healthier knees, by the way. That's also a fallacy. They have healthier knees than normal populations. So, but the, to that approach, it does go to, like, well, let's try it. Let's see what feels good. Let's, and generally speaking, I think that once you kind of address that, you find out this individual prefers a wider stance versus a tighter stance. And there are ways that I can physically assess that, but I find it's a lot easier just to ask the patient, spread the legs out. How's that feel? Put the feet close together. How's that feel? Let them determine for themselves what feels better. Normally in my population, I'm looking for, a reduction of pain or symptom, but it can also feel easier. Oh, it's way easier if my legs are out. Awesome. Do it that way. Right. Because because the variation and the difference between versions of the same exercise aren't huge. There can be single leg to double, but it's all within the same food group, right? It's not like something totally different. So you'll do that, and sometimes you'll find people from day to day, I got worse sleep, or I'm just not, I'm a little more tired today, or whatever it is. It may require an additional type of, adjustment or whatever for them to feel good about it. Or maybe I'm just using less weight today, or whatever it is. So I think that allowing yourself a little bit of variability is probably beneficial, because, and if you feel strong, go strong, right? Like, it's not a perfect thing. There are plenty of times where people feel really good, and then, they don't have a good lift, or they might pull something or whatever, and there's no perfect answer. But I find that when you listen to yourself over, listen to the actual signals of your body, not listen to yourself like, I know more than the experts or whatever, but listen to yourself in terms of, this hurts my knees. Should I keep, but my trainer said that this is what I'm supposed to do. I don't know, that maybe we're missing something there. Right. So you assess, and once you find a position that feels comfortable, you can start from there in your assessment the next time. Does this still feel good to me? Yeah, it's a good position today. So do it again.
Right. It sort of reminds me a little bit of what Travis Pollen and I talked about on our episode, which was, prevention of, say, injuries. But, even just thinking of it in terms of performance and doing better, like how often do we even think about the variables or the factors that we go into how well we may perform that day, and instead of just only focusing on the movement and the form and the technique and the tucking or not tucking. And then, one of those may happen to work one day because you need that extra strategy, or, that extra thought to it, because otherwise maybe you weren't, who knows? It's just like, I think you used this, and I don't think you said it in our last episode, actually, what we put, our second version of our last episode, because we did record it twice. But I think in the first time we did that episode, you said, like, there's all these factors and they're drops in a bucket. And then when the bucket overflows, tell me which drop it was that overflowed the bucket. And that stuck with me, because it's like, yes, the same with everything like we're doing. We don't know. And there's just, it happens to be more maybe droplets that may hold more weight, but so that's always very interesting to me. Have you any more thoughts on that question?
One observation I think that may help people also kind of think about it. If we talk about ideal posture and position or movement or whatever, just look at professional athletes. None of them move the same. None of them do. Baseball pitchers all pitch differently. Olympic weightlifters have different stances, positions, and things that they like to do, width on the bar, that type of thing. Any sport, you see unbelievable variation within that sport. It still looks like the same sport, though. That's the point. They're moving in a certain way that is consistent with completing the task of their sport. But within that, there's enormous variation of how they move, what they do, which way, boxers, anything. So I think that when we talk about the sport of weightlifting, we should allow the fact that we are not robots. No one looks the same. No, we are not built the same. Even identical twins have variants. And from that standpoint, we should understand the basic rules, the basic concepts. They're probably sound, but then go into that idea of, maybe I prefer to have my hip move this way or my pelvis shifted that way to a certain extent, but don't rewrite we're not so unique and individual as if you're just doing something totally different. But within the rules, you're probably going to want to adjust to accommodate yourself, your goals, and most importantly, what feels like you're achieving that.
Thank you. Well, everybody, thank you for tuning in today for Jonathan's answer to our question. And we're going to have him back on for some more. So if you do have any burning questions and things like training related, or just even injury related, pain related, all of the things that we would be able to sort of bounce our brains bounce our brains together about
Yeah, we could do that.
I
Why
said,
not?
yeah.
That's a
Listen,
painful thing, probably.
I'm just going to talk about that now. It's going to be the bouncing brains sessions. Okay, so then obviously you can reach out to me. You can contact me at Marianne at equipstrength.com, and yeah, we'll put it on the list and get these episodes out. Thank you, Jonathan.
My pleasure.
If you didn't see our previous interview together, then Jonathan is a physical therapist. He has been a personal trainer before that, and you are a board certified in orthopedics, and also recently you've completed your fellowship. You are now a fellow of the American Academy of Manual Orthopedics. Is that correct?
Orthopedic manual physical
Orthopedic.
therapist.
So that sounds like a big deal. And it is. I know personally it was a big undertaking and an amazing accomplishment for you professionally. Can you explain maybe that to people? Like, what does
Sure.
that really mean? Like,
Yeah, that's a great question. So in medicine, medical doctors, that's a more common thing. You'll go to your medical doctor, they will be board certified in whatever it is that they practice, family medicine, orthopedics, any of those type of subspecialties. What most people don't realize is that physical therapists have those subspecialties too. So we have orthopedics, we have sports, we have neurology, pediatrics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm board certified in orthopedics, but after your board, so that would you have your general practice boards that allows me to be a physical therapist. Then you have your specialty board, so that means that I primarily specialize in orthopedic physical therapy, and that I also attended a residency for. Which we have those two. And then afterwards, subspecialization is where you get into your fellowship training. So fellowship training is traditionally, as in medicine, a specialization within a specialization. So the reason why I bring up medicine is this is not entirely common, but it's not uncommon either. And it seems to be increasing in prevalence. So this is an additional period of time where you may study. So you may get, so in medicine, you may become a board certified in orthopedic surgery, but you may take a fellowship in, say, hand surgery or one of those things. So for me, this is a fellowship in orthopedic manual physical therapy, which means that I spent a number of years practicing physical therapy as it relates to the manual interventions. And this is the oldest fellowship in physical therapy. It's the largest, but large is relative. It's about 1% at most of practicing physical therapists will go through a fellowship level of training. So they are far fewer opportunities in fellowship. Orthopedics has the most. And so it's a matter of studying orthopedic physical therapy, the use of manual therapy, everything that manual therapy includes, which is education, assessment, application, exercise, all these kind of things. So it really becomes a really fine tuning of the details and actions that you take as an orthopedic therapist.
okay. And what sort of populations do you mostly deal with? If somebody didn't see your last episode, just so we kind of get a background on where you're coming from with answering these questions. And obviously you have that your previous career as a personal trainer before you became a physical therapist, but like, what's the lens you see these things through now?
Right. Yeah, that's great. So I am an orthopedic physical therapist and I do see general orthopedic conditions, but I specialize in the treatment of a condition called CRPS, complex regional pain syndrome. So that is a rare condition that affects maybe somewhere around 200 to 300,000 individuals. The numbers are kind of varied in how many actually have it or don't at any given time. It is a condition of unknown etiology. They don't know why individuals develop this, but the essence, and there are subdivisions, but in essence, type 1 will be typically a minor injury, although sometimes they don't know where it came from. So say I sprained my ankle and there is, following that sprain, there is a relatively short period of time elevating into the severe significant pain, swelling, extreme sensitivity, sensitization. It affects immune system, autoimmune, neurological, neuromuscular systems, physical, skin, muscle, bone, everything. It runs the gambit. It is a condition that is generally considered to be very difficult to treat. And I'm fortunate to be able to work with those individuals and to help them to recover. So I do generally treat those types of conditions, either CRPS specifically or just more widely, these type of neurophysiological, neuroorthopedic conditions where the primary issue is pain itself.
Okay. Well, thank you. Just to sort of clarify that, because it's really helpful to know your background, obviously, and your expertise. And, for anyone out there who's interested in what you're actually specializing in these days.